So this video is about friend functions. So far, we've learned about two types of functions. We've learned about static functions, and we also learned member functions. Sorry. So we learned two functions: static functions and member functions. And if you recall, a static function is basically that is really terrible. Let's try that again. A static function is really a class function. Right? That's really a class function. That is a function that belongs to the class itself, and it does not require an object to be created in order to use it. Right? No object required. Whereas member functions, those functions actually belong to the object. Those functions require an object in order to be able to use them. Right? So what I mean is if I have a class here, let's say I have a class here, and we'll call it date. Right? And inside our date class, we have our public, we have, let's say, sorry, not a void, we have our string get date. All right? And then we can have, let's say we have another function and we call it static. And we can say, get total dates. Right? And this right here is going to return the amount of date objects that have been created, right? Returns the amount of date items created. All right, so in order for us to do that, then we would need a private variable, static variable, right? And we'll just call it total. Oops, so we make that an integer, and we'll call this total, int total. All right, so we can create our constructor, right? And let's just have our date constructor. And this is just all hypothetical. So please don't feel like you need to implement this. But let's say our date object was defined this way, right? Date. And then inside here, I just say total plus plus, right? So that means that every time, right, this is the constructor, right? So this gets called every time we create an object, right? So now I'm just having my total just increment every time a date is created, right? So if I go into my int main and I was to create two date objects, date D1 and D2, I can call my static function that I just created now, right, which is called get total dates. I can call my static function, so I do that by using my class scope resolution, date, and then I say get total dates. Right? It did not require me to create an object. Notice how I'm not saying date. I'm not saying D1 or D2 dot get total dates. I'm actually saying date get total dates. Right? I'm using the class and I'm calling a function that belongs to the class, not to an object. Right? And so since the constructor was called once here and the constructor was called once here, that means that this ran twice, right? So that means that total would now equal 2. So this would return 2. And then if later on I decided to create two more dates, and then I ran that function again, get total dates, this would now return the number 4, right? Because 4 dates have been created. And that means that this has been called 4 times. And this is a static variable, right? So this belongs to the class, not the object. Right? So that means that the object, each object does not have its own variable named total. The class has one variable named total, and whatever any object does to that variable only affects that one variable, right? This is just one variable. Whereas when we create an object, the object has its own set of functions, right? If I was to create a variable here and call it month, day, and year, right? These are not static. So that means that these will belong to the object. So I could go and I could say day 4 dot month, and I can say day 3 dot month, and these are referring to two different memory addresses. Whereas if I said something like date total, this is one memory address. One memory address, and that memory address is the same no matter how many dates objects you create. All right, so we talked about static and we talked about member functions, but the topic of this is actually friend functions. So what does that mean? Those are actually functions that belong to neither the class nor the object, right? It's not a class object. It's not a class function, nor is it a member function. It's not a static function or a member function. I think that friends functions should be called friends with benefit functions, because friend functions allow you to access private members. Very bad joke. But anyway, so let's just write that down. A friend function gives access to private members. So that means it's actually not a part of the function, right? If I created a function here, let's say inside my date class, let's see if I have any room. I don't have any room, but let's just say I was continue on to my date class. So I have class date. And let's say inside my date class, I wanted to create a way to see if two dates were equal, right? So I can have a Boolean, and then I can say equal, right? And then I can pass in date D1 and date D2. Right, so say I want to check if these two date objects that are passed to them are equal, right? Well, if I'm in my program, right, this is not declared as static, right? So that means that it is a member function. So if I was in my program and I was to say something like date D1, D2, and then I want to run a member, I want to run this equal function, right? It's a member, so I would have to say something like this, D1 dot equal, and then pass D1 back to it, and D2. That would be very weird, right? That would be super weird to do that, right? What's the point of even having this D1 here, right? So that's what a friend function would do. We'll say, hey, we're going to make this not a member function, right? Meaning that I can't say D1 dot equal, right? This will not work if it's a friend function. So that means that I can just call equal itself and say D1 dot comma and then D2. Sorry, this should be a lowercase just to save confusion. Right, that makes more sense, right? Is that equal? So the problem that we have is now if this is equal, we're not calling, we're not using our class or an object to actually call this function. So what if we needed to access private members to be able to solve this this algorithm, to be able to write this algorithm? We're going to have a problem because, you know, a lot of the month, the day, and the year, you know, if you recall in my previous implementation, those are private member variables. So how would I check to see if this is equal if I actually can't access the private members, right? If I was to try to go and write the, if I was going to go try to write the definition of this equal, right? This is a Boolean, and I'll say equal date D1 and date D2. Here I would like to say, you know, if, well, excuse me, I'm just going to say, I'm going to write it really, return, I would like to say return D1 dot month is equal to D2 dot month. And then I would want to say and D1 dot day is equal to D2 dot day. And then I want to do another and D1 dot year is equal to D2 dot year. Right? If all of those are true, then they're equal. Well, I can't say dot year, dot day, dot get month. I can't use that because those are private members. And so I would need to have access to, I would need to have make getters and setters for all the days and all the years and all the months for the functions. Excuse me, for my class objects. And of course, in our date, we do that. But there's going to be times where you don't want to actually have getters and setters for all your member variables. Let's take say you had a person, right? Say you had a class called person, right? And in your person, you have private member variables. You know, name. Of course, that's a string. And you know, you have string SSN, right? I don't want to have a getter for SSN. That's not something that I would want to be able to ask. I would want only the right people to be able to access a social security number, right? So in that case, I can make a friend function, right? So to be able to fix this, I make a friend function, right? If I make, I just put in the keyword friend, and now I'm able to access these different member variables, right? So if I wanted to make something allowed to access my social security number, I want to make sure that that's a friend. So say I have a function that says, you know, process, I want to process a credit application, right? So let's say I have a Boolean process application, right? So my person says that I will allow if you're running process application, I'll allow you to have access to my social security number, and I'm telling you that I only trust this particular function. So I'm gonna make this function a friend. And so in this function, it will take a person P1 And then in that case, now I can say check credit, and then I can pass in p1.ssn, right? And now I'm allowed to do that because I made this particular function a friend function. All right, I hope that makes sense. So our secret word is pudding. That's pudding, pudding. I just want to kind of go over this a little bit. I want to go over it one more time about a friend function. So just to highlight, a friend function is not a member function. Right, they're not member functions. So that's the first thing. That means that I cannot say date D1 and then say D1 dot equal, because this does not belong to the object, so it's not a member function. All right, second thing I want to say is that a friend function friend functions are not static functions. Meaning that I can't use my class scope resolution to try to use that equal function. All right. So the third thing is friend functions must be declared inside the class. Otherwise, there's going to be a big security issue if you're allowed to say that you're a friend of a class without that being defined in the function. So they must be declared in the class. Boy. All right, so here's an example. I have my class, date, and I have public, and I'll say friend, and then I'll have the return type, Boolean, and then I'll have the name, equal, and of course the parameters, date 1, date 2. Let's just make that friend look a little nicer. All right, so this is the way I declare it. I use the friend keyword. And then is my return type, my function name, and then of course my parameter list. All right, so that is how I declare. Then when I'm defining it, because it's not part of the class, I don't use the class resolution. I do not use the class resolution operator, right? I don't use the class scope resolution operator, right? Normally, I would say date, and then by doing that, it allows me to have access to all of my member variables, right? I can say month equals 12, blah, 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 right? I don't do that with a friend, right? Also, when I declared a friend in my class declaration, I don't redeclare it as a friend in my definition. So I just start with the return type, Boolean equal date D1, date D2, and then I can finish with my implementation, right? But notice that there's no class scope resolution. And that's because it is not part of the class. It is a friend of the class. So we don't need the class scope resolution. All right. And thank you very much. That's friend functions.